calling the Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting for June 13th, 2024 to order. I don't think it matters that we don't have quorum for this because we're not voting on anything, so we'll just review all our various reports and the rest. First up, review and approval of the May 9th meeting minutes. I wasn't here, so I'm not going to comment on what was in them.
Well, we can't comment on it or approve them
Because we don't have quorum. So we'll table that till the next meeting. Next up is Ron with the Nonprofit Search Subcommittee report.
Okay. Good evening. The Nonprofit Search Committee is basically Dennis, Joe Camarata, myself, and David Kratzer and his team as the township manager. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done, who we've contacted, and try and give you a really high-level summary of where we are. So after the last meeting, we contacted Dan Grenier, who's our liaison to the supervisors, and he suggested we talk to, for council, 5 groups: Preservation PA, We Conserve PA, PA Land Trust Alliance, Heritage Conservancy, and the Historic Barn and Farm Foundation. And the issue that we were to talk to them about would be the management and preservation of the farm. Good evening, Fred. But prior to the outreach, what we did was the committee with David as the township manager created this solicitation for a nonprofit organization to manage the historic farm property. The whole idea was to give this to the people we were going to talk to so they knew what we wanted to do. Basically, the document spelled out in 2 pages, talks about the planning process we went through to get here, compatible potential uses, a vision for Patterson Farm, and 8 criteria to be utilized for selecting a nonprofit. I won't go through all 8, but just to give you a feel for where we were going with this, a demonstrated focus on historic preservation and capable of leading restoration and renovation projects, skilled in developing and executing community programs, and ability to enter long-term partnership agreement with the property owner. So we were very specific about what we were looking for. So after having completed that, we started to talk to the groups that Supervisor Grenier had suggested, as well as the following. We called the Pennsylvania Association of Not-for-Profit Organizations, PANO. I know them based on my dealings with Pennsbury Manor. We spoke to the chairman, Ann Gingrich. She was very helpful and will continue to be helpful as we move forward in terms of a 501c3. They have both written policies that we could adopt, and they also have consultants if we need them going forward. We spoke to the Lancaster Farmland Trust, Jeff Swinehart, who also knows David very well, and he was extremely helpful as well. And Preservation PA, Mindy Crawford, who was very familiar with Patterson Farm and actually saw some of the results that we had on TV. She watched some of the films of all of our meetings in the ad hoc meeting. Joe Camarata then contacted Janice Mullen. Janice is part of PHMC, Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission, and also Jeff Marshall, who's a real key resource. He was formerly head of the Heritage Conservancy and is very familiar with this project. He's been to some of our meetings at the ad hoc meetings. So let me try and summarize some of the thoughts very briefly that we got from these folks, all 501c3s, about the task, and then summarize a couple meetings that we had with that David had set up, David Kratzer. Observations. The first observation that we got from all of these 501c3s is that this is a unique situation. And why? Why is that not-for-profits normally do fundraising and programming But rarely, if ever, do they also manage a property and buildings and a facility. So this is unique, and just to give you an example, my own example at Pennsbury Manor, we raise money and do programming at Pennsbury Manor. We raise about $400,000 a year, but the state, the Commonwealth, PHMC, puts in about $600,000, and they manage the facility. So it's a lot different. And none of the not-for-profits that we talk to would take on this task. It's not something they would do. Most, if not all, stated that we would need to create, not find, a not-for-profit. Pano and others could really help us to create that not-for-profit, including all the regulatory forums that go to IRS and board policy creation, et cetera, et cetera. So there are people who could help us do that. The second major observation made by the majority of the nonprofits we talked to was that the size of our stewardship for this property needs to be articulated. What resources will be committed before creation of the not-for-profit? Some said there should be an endowment. And the reason for that is for a 501c3 to both do fundraising and programming and to manage the property is really a heavy lift for most 501c3s. So you need to separate those two out in your mind. Let me now turn to several meetings we had that David Kratzer had set up, and David, I'll ask you if you want on one of them to jump in here. These meetings focused on identifying people in the community who could assist us in identifying resources, grants, in-kind resources, and potentially seed money. We had a total of 4 meetings, but let me just mention 2. First, we had a really good session that David set up with Kyle Melander. He's the district director for Congressman Fitzpatrick. And he talked through a number of federal grants that we might qualify for that could jumpstart this project. And he's certainly willing to work with us to identify various sources of funding to do this. He suggested that we get competitive grants first and then use that to go after the bigger funds, was his suggestion. The second was the Redevelopment Authority of Bucks County, Jenifer. I did not attend that meeting, but in talking to David, he indicated that they may be able to partner with us to complete some of the projects in the master plan. And David, do you want to comment on it?
I think, David, you might as well sit up here.
Do you want me,
Yes.
to sit up there? Okay.
Dan, how are you? Good to see you.
We don't have an audience anyway.
Do you want your normal seat, or do you want your? It doesn't matter. It's kind of interesting over on the side of the So yes, as Ron has indicated, we did have an opportunity to meet with the Redevelopment Authority of Bucks County, both Deanna Ferry, as Ron had noted, as well as Jeff Dawark, I believe his last name is. He's the executive director of the Redevelopment Authority, and you know, as Ron said, that was it was a great meeting. I think there are a number of resources that the Redevelopment Authority can bring to assist with implementation. In my section of the agenda, I was going to provide an update regarding environmental remediation, but much of the work that the Redevelopment Authority does on projects, while not necessarily historic properties or agricultural properties, many of the skills and sort of resources that they leverage for redevelopment projects throughout the county really relate to needs that we have with Patterson Farm. So things like, again, environmental remediation, and again, this is blending into the next sort of section of the agenda. The Redevelopment Authority has funding that's available through the US EPA for purposes of conducting a comprehensive Phase 1 environmental assessment. There were prior environmental assessments that were done by the township on the property, largely focused on contamination, lead contamination associated with the paint on buildings. However, there are a number of other sort of environmental considerations on the property, including a buried diesel storage tank, and there's some other sort of potential hazardous storage that's occurred in the barns over time. So the redevelopment authority has funding available, is interested in partnering with us to do the Phase 1 assessment, and then could potentially be involved with the Phase 2 effort as well. But again, as I was saying, in addition to sort of the environmental aspects, as the implementation committee is aware, we're dealing with things like utility extension, we're dealing with issues related to building construction, we're dealing with issues related to potential enhancements related to circulation. All of those are things that the redevelopment authority has expertise in dealing with. So they're going to circle back with us, but I think it was a productive first meeting and a resource that's available on our county level of government to support the effort here in Lower Makefield Township.
Thanks, Dave. So let me just try and summarize then where we are, the committee, in terms of the 501c3. I would say we're encouraged because we've, I think, begun to identify the elements that need to be brought to bear to implement the vision. One is the not-for-profit. That may take time, and it may go on a parallel path, and yet it may follow on to the next part, which is to identify grants, both federal and state, seed money, community partners, and perhaps in-kind services. And we're in the process of doing that. And some of the meetings that David set up has helped us think some of that through initially. And then we need to stage the implementation of all this so that the creation of the not-for-profit is practical and I'm going to say clear on our expectations. We have to, really, we have to be careful how we look at this on a 1 to 3 year basis and not expect to get all this done right away. I think we've learned that in some of our research to date. And then if we can get the resources now, let's say some funding resources from the feds, the state, seed money, perhaps angel investors, we could use that to put it in a fund temporarily that the township has, a community fund, it's called it. And then as we create the 501c3, let's say between years 1 and 3, we then transfer the money that we've secured now to the 501c3, and it makes the lift a little less heavy to do. So we're going to continue to research this, the funding and management of Patterson Farm, and determine the appropriate pathway forward. I think we've got the right group together, we're talking to the right people, and we're going to continue to talk to them. Questions?
That sounds great. Making strides, I like it. And I think you're familiar with this group, but some of the supervisors have been approached by the, what's their name? Is it Patterson Farm Preservation
Yes.
Group? They've requested to be able to make a presentation at some point.
Sure.
About some of the ideas they have to this board and maybe to the Board of Supervisors. I know you all have had interaction with some of their folks in the past, so you're not unfamiliar.
Yes.
But they have some ideas for, you're talking about years 1 through 3 kind of thing, where they very high level, they have some potentially interesting ideas that might occur in that time period. So I don't know when they'd be ready to do that, but I think it would be worthwhile just to hear what they're
Dan, we'd be
saying.
delighted to do that. It's on our agenda. Yeah. We started with these other groups, the ones that you suggested,
absolutely,
the 5 you suggested and others, just to give ourselves kind of a global view first, because we know these folks. I mean,
exactly.
they're our neighbors and they've been working this for a long time. Yeah. but we certainly want to come to them and we want to hear their ideas about the Agricultural Heritage Center and as well as their other ideas, yes.
Yeah, and I think the approach you're taking is great, obviously, because there are these larger entities and groups of entities that have a lot of experience, some of which you all have worked with and for at some point, right? So there's a wealth of information there that you can glean from them, possibly work with them, and then see what we can do to implement it. So I appreciate the work you're
Thanks.
doing there.
Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Done.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions?
Yep. Dave, I know you
Yeah.
mentioned,
He's going to do his environmental one here next.
Okay,
next
just-
topic, so.
all right, so we'll
Yeah, I mean,
wait on the phase one
could-
ESA
well, I mean,
stuff there.
the reality is I sort of did it already, to be honest with
Yeah.
you. So I don't have much more on that at this point, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I guess the one thing to bring up with regard to the environmental remediation is it's more than just the lead paint.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
And it's more than just the lead paint and the diesel oil tank.
yeah. Well, as I know, you've told and shown. I would be curious, just for phase one ESAs, phase twos, all that,
Sure,
I've done a
sure.
lot of that stuff
Yeah.
over the years. I don't do them every day anymore, but I'd be interested to see, the township, through our engineers, have done formal phase one ESAs in the past. We've done structural assessments in the past and some other things. I'd be curious to see what the redevelopment authority could offer, if it's funding versus actually completion. Phase one, technically, if you're doing ASTM, phase one ES, it's only good for about a year.
Sure, sure.
Maybe even 6 months now. I think they've even shortened it. So I think that might not be as much bang for the buck unless there's stuff we haven't identified yet, whereas the phase two is actually getting in there, testing and seeing where you have to potentially remediate. So I'm curious if do we need to do a phase? I know what
your
you're,
phase one is incomplete right now, just
Yeah.
like your structural survey, when we get to the
Yeah.
next agenda
Yeah.
after that was your previous structural surveys.
So again, I think the other.
scoping is the
Yeah,
big thing.
I mean, I think the other thing
Curious
is, as you said, sort of the validity period associated with those as well.
Yeah.
So the other sort of resource, just sort of on the environmental front, that the redevelopment authority brings is their council is actually an environmental law practitioner. So there's some additional advice that I think we can leverage in terms of legal guidance that's very sort of specialized and technical, that's available through the redevelopment authority. But I would imagine that in order to sort of transition to the phase two, which you're absolutely correct, and I think Peter, based on his work, you based on your work, probably are aware that we're going to be doing a phase
it's
two,
gonna
right?
happen. You just have
There's-
to- it's a phase, right? You get
We
to
almost
phase one
have to,
before you do phase two.
we're almost starting over, making sure that the phase one is comprehensive, then going into the phase two, doing a comprehensive phase two. The other thing that they've, talked about is going through the Act Two clearance and helping us through that process as well. And then also, one of the things that was said when we met with Kyle from Congressman Fitzpatrick's office, he actually had mentioned Jeff, if you recall, Ron, in that meeting, and said, I have a good handle on sort of federal resource that's available. Jeff is your guy as it relates to identifying state and county resources that may be available in order to assist. So again, I think they were productive, meetings, and it'll evolve in terms of the relationship and sort of the scope of the relationship. But I do think there's resource there that could start to operationalize the master plan and move towards the direction of implementation on those foundational items that need to get done.
Yeah, to that end, I'd personally be interested from a planning perspective, right? Phase ones can be very comprehensive in terms of what parts of the property they look at versus they can be a little more focused. They're not, generally, relatively speaking, they're not very expensive. You're not.
And you have the advantage of all the existing documents.
Correct.
They should
Yeah.
take that review and, well.
You build on
We
it.
both know what the
Yeah, no,
process is.
we're there, but, so I think it would be beneficial understanding as we develop the scope for what the phase one and the initial phase two would be because those phase one and phase two leads to remediation, hopefully pretty quickly. I don't know if we need the Act Two program to be implemented for this, but that's something that they
Yeah,
can
I mean, they
provide
can,
guidance
yeah.
on. But it would be helpful as we move forward to say, okay, we definitely need to cover this section of the farm or these groups of buildings in this phase one versus maybe we do it later on this one, or we just group them all, knowing that they're only good for 6 months. If we want to do them in chunks versus one big group, and then move on to the phase two, same thing in chunks or big group, and then from there we have all the information and can really, that's when we, as Board of Supervisors, that's when we start putting out RFPs really to do remediation.
Yeah, and that was some of the discussion that sort of generally occurred over the course of these 4 conversations was, there were questions about what sections are sort of priorities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big sort of nut to crack, and so, they were saying is if you had to, prioritize, farmsteads, are you over here, are you here, are you all, like, where are you at? So there were a fair amount of questions about sort of priority and sort of the township's prioritization of efforts, given the magnitude and scale of the efforts that are involved to fully implement what was contemplated by the master plan. So,
Just why you guys are here. You need help.
It probably makes sense, though, to do a comprehensive phase one, even if it has to be revisited later, at least it probably makes sense to all be in a comprehensive phase one, just simply because even, yes, if it has to be redone again, at least it's all in one spot.
You can
which
use
it-
this as a planning document
Yeah.
for this group.
For this,
and then-
yes.
Then you can redo it as.
Because that
needed.
at least allows us, everybody to understand in a bigger picture what's going on. Otherwise, we might have gaps in our knowledge that could have pretty severe impacts farther down the road.
yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Broad is probably better at this point, so. So just as a follow-up to sort of what Ron said in terms of Kyle, so, one of the things that Kyle had asked for was sort of a keyword summary of the project. Jim has worked on that, so he either has submitted to Kyle at this point or will be, but there are resources available through the Library of Congress to identify, as Ron said, funding sources. So once those sort of keywords are hit, Kyle will have them do the report. And as Ron said, he spoke about competitive grants, but then also spoke about the potential of a federal earmark as part of subsequent sort of congressional budget negotiations and so forth. So again, I think it was a good first step. And the 2 meetings that Ron didn't comment on, one was sort of in the construction field, so again, versed in construction-related matters and construction management. And then the other individual was somebody that potentially could provide some of the seed money in the form of a donation in the event that we're prepared to accept that kind of resource from the community. So it was good.
And we're not going to leave out the state side either. I mean, our plans are to talk to Steve Santasiero, obviously, and Perry Warren. They've been briefed in the past. Fred, you briefed, I know Perry. I saw Perry over the weekend, but I said we'd get on his calendar, brief him and Steve on all this as well.
Yep.
And to your point, it may even be worthwhile to talk to county commissioners, see what they may have to offer.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, saw a couple of them recently, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I guess we're through that. So next up would be the building subcommittee, which amazingly, we're all here. So I don't know if we want to do this round robin, or do you want to start with safety, Jenifer?
Sure. Okay, you've been doing a bunch of field work for us, and I really appreciate that, because he's been tromping around all the buildings. I did have an opportunity to meet with him for about an hour and a half, and we talked some broad stroke observations. The first thing we are looking at is the prioritizing safety. So we did see that there are some structures that have failing foundations. It looks like things are moving. We've got building materials that are in movement as well. For example, we have a slate roof, and the slates are sliding off. And their anchorage is changing, it's failing. Part of the ideas are, if we'd like to continue to walk around these buildings, invite the public to see the spaces around the buildings, we've got to make sure they don't get too close. So our first hit list here is the corn crib over at Patterson. We're recommending a chain link fence go around that structure, and it would be set up so that it would take care of the overrun where the slate slides off the gable and flies for a little bit and then lands. So it would be 15 feet away from the sides and then only 5 feet from the gable ends. So it doesn't have to be a huge pen, but it just has to be enough so that we're reasonably comfortable.
And that's correct. We're talking Patterson Farm because Dennis misinterpreted our comments originally as Satterthwaite. We're talking Patterson. People do park their cars around that building. There are summer camps up there.
Right.
And slates have slid off. You can find the broken slates in the mowed
Yeah.
grass there.
Would it be possible, because I think this might be a action item for the township staff, to just hand draw even something on an aerial, just say, here's where we're looking, this is with notes about distance, just to make sure it's spoon-fed to people that may be doing the work if we're having those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a floor plan for this structure, which means we basically have its footprint on the
Right.
site. Just annotate it with the fence
That's-
location.
That's perfect, yeah.
Yep.
And I'll just ask, we've been on enough construction sites, it would be, are you thinking construction chain link that's sort of temporary with the leg, I forget,
feet?
the feet, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think we want to go to the expense of
No.
doing a
Per-
gypcrete, kind of quickcrete
Yeah.
foundation, no.
Question from the public finally, because you were not thinking about this one, were you? Go ahead.
Bet, would you mind, could you
up to
just
the mic.
come up to the mic?
Microphone.
Thank you.
They don't put the red light on for him.
That's because that only applies to Board of Supervisors, zoning, and planning, because I already asked that
You don't
question,
get the
because
red
I'm used
light.
to the red light.
Okay.
Red light. Hi,
I always get the red light because you can never hear me. I'm used to it.
Hi, I'm Beth Sovany. I am a 43-year resident of Lower Makefield, and I am the executive director for Artist of Yardley, which rents the Patterson Janney House. Summer camp is confined to the AOI footprint. It doesn't cross the road, doesn't cross into the parking area. Children are not present, so that does not add into your safety considerations. Also during summer camp, we tell people, we'll tell our members and we tell the public, nobody's allowed up there in the proximity to the summer camp who does not belong to summer camp. So again, that take that off the table as well.
Well, but other people do utilize the facility. And people do park around there, and people do drive around there. I'm not saying not necessarily during camp.
They're
but-
not going to the road. The slate falling off the corn crib isn't going to the road. It barely goes beyond the diesel pump. Okay? It goes behind to there, nobody's there. Just, letting you know the use
Yeah.
involved
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, so some of the discussion even, and I know you mentioned sort of construction chain link, the other option that when this sort of came up, Derek had suggested perhaps like temporary snow fencing, something of that nature.
Do construction, like the orange construction
Yeah,
fence?
it's so windy on that property, and you know how that stuff just kind of blows. You'd have to do a really good job and check it, because it is windy.
It's a little breezy. up
Yeah,
Yeah, but regardless, I hear what you're saying. Regardless, it's a safety concern for anyone that's out there. Do it to, I think we look at doing it to the extent that it's necessary. and not impede, folks that may be in the area. We don't, obviously, there are a lot of people that over the years that have gone to the farm to, you see photos on Facebook all the time, people wanting to show their picture, which is great, but they tend to be your group is organized and follows the rules, right? Generally, sometimes there are other people that just show up and go do their thing, so we just want, that's, got to protect against that, so I get what you're saying.
Yep.
Okay. But if it's a chain link fence and you have to do an RFP, you might as well do an RFP for the roof instead of the chain link fence. Just go directly to fix.
Yeah, I think we would
instead
be
of
able to
doing
do
the
that
chain link.
without going through an RFP process,
Yeah,
but.
that's just material.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that should be cheap for that type of fence.
I would
If you
think so.
just do snow fencing, that's fine, then you don't have to do a big expense. Okay.
Do you want to go through the bullet
I'll
points?
go through the next one, yes. So we've been posting photos to the file site sorted out by buildings, so you can see current conditions. I know that there were previous photos done a few years ago, so you can see how things have changed between, or there are things that have been focused on this time. Concurrent with that, there's a multi-tab spreadsheet being developed that we're circulating, and it will be posted up and updated to the file site with items that are found identified by building. One thing to say is a couple things to say about that is that conditions vary dramatically from building to building, even within each farmstead. So one building might be in pretty good shape and really just need painting, and the next building over might have significant structural issues. Or here's a good example on something that wasn't apparent, that the main barn over on Satterthwaite Farm had work done on it just a little over 10 years ago. They used low quality lumber. Some of that siding has already rotted 100% of the way through. So there's a variety of things there. The jury report captured some major issues, didn't capture all of them, so we're finding more things as we go around too. So there's a lot of differences between the various buildings. A lot of buildings that, I know there was a discussion about painting. Some buildings to paint could be painted. Some buildings have very significant siding issues, not just the Satterthwaite main barn, but other ones where there's elevations on the building that are rotted. So it seems to depend on the materials that were used on particular buildings, and since they're all from different periods and have had different maintenance, that's what's happened there. The next thing we talked about out there is there a possibility for doing volunteer activities? There are things that could be done right now that would help the buildings right now. First up being removing the vines and vegetation and taking that away from the building, because it damages the building to have that on there. Colleen, who has the caretaker's house, is trying to take care of that one on her own, but I noticed she's not, but she did specifically come up to me to point that out.
Yeah, and when we were out there today, Derek had mentioned that as well. I think he's going to have Public Works go out and try to take care of some of the vines on the caretaker house in particular, or cottage.
But it's on a lot of buildings, and we were wondering about the possibility for volunteer activities. And Jenifer, do you want to talk about the volunteerism?
Yeah, I was like, why can't we get a group like they did for 5 Mile Woods, and have a committed work day and have very specific tasks that are easy to perform, and they provide a lot of benefit, and people would finish and feel really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that may be an opportunity, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt, but that may be an opportunity to engage the group that Dan had mentioned, Patterson Farm Preservation Group. If there's a membership base there, they could provide perhaps some volunteers to help with a cleanup day.
And whether there's a membership base or they just they know a lot of people that
Correct,
would be
yeah.
interested, right?
Yeah.
We're more likely the case. I think, again, going back to doing the phase 1 and phase 2, and the fence for that matter, the main concern is making sure we focus them on areas that are safe for them. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. focus when we do that, because I think the whole idea of honestly talking to the Patterson Farm Preservation 501c3s to what they could do is really because the volunteerism is a great story relative to the whole farm. So to the extent that we can leverage volunteers to do anything, I think it's great for the community. So everyone feels good about it and they're all part of it. But this first step, doing weed removal and vine removal and stuff like that, if we can do it in a safe way, I don't see why we don't do it.
Yeah, and it really is significant. For instance, is pulling Satterthwaite Farmhouse apart, the vines are on it. So like just cutting them, some things just need to be cut, or cutting vegetation back like from the caretaker's village. And it would need to be said that there is a lot of poison ivy out there too on the property. So that would need to be mentioned for the activity days to dress appropriately.
Yeah, and honestly, this time of year, anyone who's been mowing their own lawn or doing any gardening or landscaping around their house, they know how fast stuff is growing right now. So it's a really good time to do it if we can get something organized.
Jenifer, that's a great idea. I mean, there's multiple examples in the township, 5 Mile Woods, what's being done with Slate Hill Cemetery in terms of a citizens group and the Historic Commission and the work that they're doing there.
Tree plantings we've done.
Yeah,
Environmental
correct,
Advisory Commission, that's
EAC does
Correct,
all the
yeah,
time.
so.
I have some concerns, though, especially at Satterthwaite, because a lot of that is reaching up into the second story and also into and behind the siding that's there. So people would need to have certain definite direction and oversight as to exactly what they're doing. And once you start pulling pretty hefty vine growth.
And you might not pull vines off everywhere. It just might be a matter of cutting them back and treating them.
But
so.
also,
Just
you're
leave them at
looking
the
at
base.
potentially height and talking about ladders or lifts
No.
and
No,
so
no, we're
on.
not. We're just saying we could leave the vines and just kill them.
Yeah.
Cut them off, treat the base.
Right, let them die and wither, and then they'll come off more easily when we get the chance to get higher.
Okay, well, but somebody needs to be there and give definite direction and oversight.
Oh, yes, and Fred and I saw that the vines have extended into the interior of Satterthwaite Farmhouse, which gives it a nice horror show look on the first floor in the southeast corner. There are other activities, it seems like it could be done. Maybe they're township, maybe they're volunteerism, maybe we can get a contractor to provide services as a, for tax deduction purposes. Things like filling the groundhog holes. It's an exterior and interior issue. It's a safety issue too. It's a stability issue. Adding plexiglass covers that have been done onto additional openings. Remove and store the shutters from the Satterthwaite house in the north, south, and west elevations. They're coming apart while they're out there, and might as well take them down. It's one less activity later on, and we'll clean up the site. I understand that things like this need to be clearly communicated.
Sure.
Remove other debris, maybe not some of the items that are suspect and need to be looked at for phase one, but there is other debris out there in different places. Maybe another volunteer activity day with supervision again is park a dumpster at one farmstead and go around and just identify and have people with gloves pitch stuff into the dumpster to clean up the interiors and exteriors. And maybe even volunteers could do some of the buildings that are relatively low, stable, and lead paint free. Example, Satterthwaite Well Garage does not have lead paint on it.
Okay.
Those are just ideas that we've identified
and they're
for
all-
either,
All good.
yeah.
So I guess, obviously, we have a list,
Yeah.
right? So I think,
But the first one would be deal with the vines.
yeah, no, that seems, no pun intended, that's sort of a low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, couldn't help that one. But I think if we you have the list, maybe look at it a little bit, see if there's anything else you want to add or tweak or anything like that, obviously. And then, to the extent that we need to, Dave, I think we may need to vet the list with our township engineer, just to be on the safe side, and per, everything you mentioned, Fred, as well. And then make sure, and then, okay, then we have, okay, these are the items that we can do, short-term, medium, long-term, right? And I know all know this, but, and then say, okay, if we're gonna snip the vines, how are we gonna get organized to go do that? Or is it something Public Works can do in an hour? Whatever it may be, let's see how we can get that done quickly. It's nice to have the volunteers out there. I think it's a great idea, but we also have to organize them and schedule the time and get everyone out there and have equipment, all that stuff.
Well, if everybody's all interested in this farm, preserving this farm,
We'll know. They'll show up.
I think
Yeah.
that this is a good indicator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just got to figure out how we, whenever EAC is a good example, they organize these tree plantings with Park and Rec sometimes and other places, but they have a way that they do it to get the word out, to get everyone together and to get there and get it done. This is a new thing for this committee to do, right? So we just want to make sure that we can leverage whatever resources we have so we can get the word out, get volunteers to show up and get it organized, that's all. So if that might, I'll keep talking. That might be that particular activity with the vines. That might be something we just go back to the EAC and say, hey guys, can you help us with this one? And I'm pretty sure they'd step up and do that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or if you all want to take the lead.
No, I think that's great. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've got great mechanisms already in place, so let's utilize those. I do think that we need to talk to professionals about the groundhog abatement because it's pervasive, and we need to figure out how to keep them uninterested in these spaces. And right now, they like it because it's quiet. There's no human involvement. And I don't know, we need to.
There is trapping that's going on at the property, though, and I don't, so I'm just
Yeah.
letting you know that there is
That's-
trapping.
That's good. I mean, there might be some deterrents that we could have, sound. I don't know what kinds of things that they don't like. I know I've tried it with moles at my home, and to some extent it works, but.
Have you seen Caddyshack?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, so,
Dynamite?
right,
No.
right. Yeah. No, we just need to get somebody to give us some advice about how to handle it and walk them through and let them see the extent of it, because I was shocked. It's really undermining the foundation at the barn, and it's dangerous to walk around in there because the holes are big enough to take a whole leg.
And we're talking about the Patterson barn right now, not Satterthwaite, although Satterthwaite also has groundhogs and a low elevation. Now, again, these are things that will be coming out in more detail. There's hundreds of items out there, but potentially some of this might be resolvable with like gravel, particularly inside the buildings. If you were to use, say, 57 stone or something like that and infill the whole area, a groundhog can't get in there, or if they do get in there, any digging they do is going to be unsuccessful because the aggregate's just going to keep pouring in behind them. It would be its own natural deterrent then. I know there's some cost associated with that, and obviously that'd probably be a township activity or something, but it could
Yeah.
work in some spaces, just as an example of a solution.
But again, as Ron noted, I mean, we did meet with some folks that are involved in construction that have some capacity to probably do that work as an in-kind contribution and service. So we can explore that as well, so.
And speaking of volunteerism and working with other corporations, Ron, I know that extensively down at Pennsbury Manor, they do that.
Yes.
Looking at more than like what we're talking about with 5 Mile Woods and EAC, which is just getting local volunteers, which is fine for something like Vines. I know there's more organized groups down at Pennsbury Manor, corporate groups and stuff like that might be a model that's more effective for something that's larger scale.
Nothing jumps to my mind except that a lot of folks have been mentioning to me to go to Bucks County Community College to get some of the students there to help. We get a lot of students coming out of Bucks County Community College who study, I believe, historic preservation.
It is a specialization you can
Yeah.
take at Bucks
Who
County.
could then perhaps help us with some of this volunteerism. That would help. We actually have, we
Yeah.
have someone who coordinates all the volunteers. I mean, there's a, you know, it's a full-fledged position that manages the volunteers, as you know very well.
Yeah, not to.
But I'll think some more about that.
Not to volunteer Joe Camarata in any fashion, but he's actually actively participating in that program, I think, at Bucks County, so he may be able to help sort of leverage the resource that may be available there in terms of student population that may have an interest in that. So we can talk to him about that.
Okay, and I guess the last comment I have, and then if anybody, Jenifer or Fred have more to add, the last one to add is that there is a lot. I think that's not a surprise to anybody, but that some things have to happen in a certain order. So some buildings actually need to have structural work done before you even worry about something like painting, and in some cases that structural work is extensive. And that is not cheap, particularly if you're going to be doing it to meet Department of the Interior historic preservation standards. So those things will have to be weighed at some point here in the consideration about what buildings or which farmstead gets prioritized due to the limited amount of resources. And that's a reality, that the resources might seem big, but they aren't aren't remotely close to the scale of what the issues are out
Yeah,
there.
Yeah, so understood.
So, Peter, we talked about the environmental, like the phase 1, phase 2. We've previously had previously had a structural report.
Correct, which is for the most part accurate, but did not find all the structural issues. You're going to get a more detailed structural report with more items in it.
That's where I'm going. So there's the 3 items that can all, well, 1 then 2, but can all could go in parallel, because those are all reports and inspections. Those aren't 6-figure items. Those are, 5-figure items, or on the low end generally. So we could move forward with those fairly quickly, so that then, I'm thinking out loud, that allows us to work on prioritization. And
I
inform
think that we'll have
present
enough
there.
information from the Drury report and what I add in, that you'll have a sense of the structural. And then the next step would probably be, what do we want to focus on, and then get an engineer or historic architectural firm involved for that. But I don't think you really need to look at the whole campus, because that is not going to be
Yeah.
cheap.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have a timeline for how long you think it'll take to get all that information organized, so we?
It'll be right now, there's a rough outline already, which I can upload, which I mentioned, but it'll be more information the more time I spend on it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've already incorporated the Drury report items in, I'm incorporating the Drury report items into it.
So you're well on your way.
Huh?
Well on its way, which is good news.
Okay. Fred, you want to add?
No, I think you've got it. A good start with the spreadsheet that you've developed, and what we need to do is go through that and look back at some of the other reports and consolidate all that information as best we can, so that then the township and the township's engineer can come up with an actual RFP or as needed contract development for the, but I think prioritizing what we think our recommendations are for which buildings to key on initially, because we know that I think at this point that the estimate is not adequate for a full-scale, property-wide, in terms of painting at least. But so we've got to prioritize which buildings we want to hit first,
Yep.
and what kinds of things have to be done first before somebody's out there with a paintbrush, kind of thing.
So Fred, to your point, in terms of estimates, do we think there's, after you do your thing, Peter, that you're doing, do we think there's enough information for our engineer or somebody else to provide an engineer's estimate to inform the township before, as we're putting together RFPs to do different things, so we have a good feel for
I
what it's going to
think
be?
it'll at least give you an outline for that, but to the point, there's there's a whole magnitude higher amount of work
Yeah.
value out there required than what's been allocated. So there has to be some sort of, there's no point in doing an estimate on something that's not even remotely likely going to get worked on. There has to be some sort of decision-making about how to shrink down to what buildings are going to be the priority to start with.
Right.
So rather than worrying, because some of these conditions are going to deteriorate, which I think has been part of the past experience problems with previous reports, as things have continued to deteriorate over time. So some of this will just be an update to that snapshot, but there's going to have to be some decision-making done.
Yeah. Like, 100%. In order to make those decisions, I just want to make sure that, there's, when it comes to what money we're going to put forth and what work we're going to do, there's effectively stabilization of the buildings, just to keep them from further deteriorating. That's not renovating by any means. And then
We don't even have the budget in hand to stabilize the
I don't think
buildings.
Our township budget is, overall is, so just trying to understand if we can, if there is a way to put a dollar sign next to each building or some group of buildings. So we say, okay, if we've got $700,000 to do something,
Yep.
looks like here's the different ways we can move things around to fit within that, the different pieces of the pie in that open circle that we could fit in there, and then that would
Yes.
help.
Yeah, you can cost with a narrative scope of work,
Okay.
definitely.
That's all I'm looking to try to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if I can just take a page out of Dennis Stedman's playbook, Dennis said, we've gone through this whole process. We need to show the community now progress. We need to pick a couple things and get it done.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's what we're all saying, but I don't want us to get stuck in neutral because all these numbers are out there.
Correct,
We-
which
we
is
gotta
why.
move- We got to
Yeah.
move forward and get some things done.
So the next meeting, you'll have my updated report, and it'll give you a sense of the level of work in different places. And we've identified here some like real low-hanging fruit, like volunteers go deal with vines. Maybe some buildings can be painted with no work at all. Dealing with the groundhog issues, doing some of the cleanup on the site.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in some cases, we're just restricted in what we can do because there are major structural issues. That corn crib at Patterson has a rotted sill and the footers are all moving. That's Patterson, not Satterthwaite. Satterthwaite's obviously a different issue. Well, that corn crib, to fix that corn crib is a pretty huge deal. So you're probably not going to be a priority building, for instance, on the first go-around here, even though Patterson Farm is more likely to be the place that we're going to prioritize on, I would assume, because it's in a more complete setting. But those are the trade-offs that everybody's going to need to be prepared to talk about.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you're prepared, I know you're, not to put all this on your shoulders, obviously, but you have your spreadsheet and your notes, and you're starting to organize things there. Is that next meeting or the meeting after that, is that going to be sort of a presentation you're making?
I can,
To
like
the
I said,
group?
all the photos, I've already been
That-
uploading the photos to the site, and they're sorted by building. I'm using the numbering scheme that was provided in the Drury and Solor reports, so that I'm maintaining consistency with that. I'm not detailing out, for instance, we need to remove vines in the building. That's just a generic statement, but.
Yeah. I have a
But like
budgetary
stone,
measure
like
game going in my
like
head.
masonry foundation is failing on north wall might be what a comment is right
Yeah.
now.
I got you.
Or southwest and northeast corner posts on Satterthwaite Farmhouse are rotted through and they need to be Dutchmaned or replaced. And that would have to happen before the siding could be replaced before the siding can be painted. So that's just an example of how a sequence of events leads up to painting.
Yeah, painting's the last thing you do.
Well, no, there's a lot of things that can come later, like interior restoration on these, if you're just trying to make the exterior look good. But to make the exterior look good, some things have to happen first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
New items from anybody?
Thanks for doing all the inspections. Thanks for reaching out to everyone.
Sure.
It's good to see progress on both fronts.
Okay. I guess the subcommittee here, we need to figure out who's going to tackle reaching out on the volunteer issue, but
So, yeah, Art, no one's on, you used to be, I used to be. I'm not the liaison of the EAC, but I can put folks, does someone here want to be sort of the liaison between this committee and the EAC to have those conversations? It doesn't have to be me, I can introduce you. I thought
it doesn't
Kevin-
have to be me either.
I know you know everybody. And I know Kevin used to come to these meetings, right? Kevin Gallen, I think, has been to these meetings in the
Correct,
past.
and I just
Yeah.
saw
Who's
him
on
because the EAC meeting was just before this, and he was in here, and we talked briefly about Patterson.
Okay.
So even from a scheduling standpoint, it works out. You can
Yeah.
just retain one member and then.
Hang back, yeah. So, yeah,
If you want, I'll get it started, if you want.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can do the same. It's just whoever's available to do it to get the conversation started and get rolling.
And that might be good, Dennis, because if we start looking at the larger volunteer issues, I think maybe your experiences with other entities might help.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it should be easy for them to get the word out. That'd be good.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I have 355 members at the Artist of Yardley. I'm sure they'll be able to volunteer as well.
That's great. That does make something. It
For
could be
the
posted
record-
on the bulletin board
For the
there.
record, the Artists of Yardley are going to volunteer.
Hey,
No,
and with
but-
things like cutting vines, you need fine motor skills, and as most artists I know have very good dexterity, which would be really
Well,
good.
there we go. We got the building painting crew now, too.
Oh,
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
all of that,
They know
yeah.
what they're doing.
But that is something, too. There is the bulletin board at Artists of Yardley. That would be a good place to post
Yeah.
stuff well in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone has a pretty good social media presence too to get the word out that way, so that'll be good.
All right. Is there a motion? I guess motion to adjourn?
I think you have to call them public.
Yeah, do you
There is
want-
nobody public.
There's no-
And with a quorum now, Mr. Chair, do you
Oh, we can
want to,
do that.
do you want to do the minutes? Get
Yes.
those?
Do we have we now have a quorum, so we can do approval of the minutes or comments on the minutes from last month. I will not be voting because I was not attending the
Make a
meeting.
motion that we approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, there we go. That's done. And a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay.